Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the very first Sage 100 year-end webinar. This is one of a two-part series. This week, today we'll be covering part one. It's payroll and fiscal year-end processing, tips, tricks, and some frequently asked questions. Next week, it'll be some forms processing demos, W-2s, 1099s, and Affordable Care Act reporting. On the session today is myself. My name is Alec Burke. I've been with Sage for about 16 years. The background handling the Q&A is Linda Raby, and Linda's been with Sage just about twice that long, so a lot of collective knowledge on the session today. And again, thanks for joining us. You should see a Q&A option at the top of your window. And if you click that, that should load the Q&A stream, I believe, on the right side. Please post any questions you have in that Q&A section for answering at the end of the session, and we will do our best to answer as many as possible. We're going to start off with a quick look at the year-end center for Sage 100. This is something that we put a lot of effort into every year. Linda does a lot of work on this, and it's available for all of our Sage products. It's very easy to find. Quick Google search of Sage 100 year-end center should pull it right up. And here it is in the flesh. There's
Alec,
a ton.
Alec, I'm so sorry to interrupt. I'm not sure if it's just
Oh,
me, but I don't see the PowerPoint.
Good grief. My first mistake. Thank you very much.
No worries. No worries at all.
There we go. That should be better.
Thank you. Perfect.
Okay. Thank you, Melissa. Yeah, this is our first webinar. It's my first webinar, so really appreciate everyone just rolling with me. I'm also fighting a little bit of a cold, so my apologies if I have to mute here or there. Right back into the year-end center. So this is our Sage 100 year-end center. It's full of great resources. We have our frequently asked questions links on the left. We've got some links to the Sage University and year-end training, some checklists which will help you process through your year-end, as well as an easy place where you can find the product updates, and we'll talk about updates a little later. On the right side, you've got a Sage 100 resources. And this is a great place to find the knowledge base and the community, a link back to the year-end center, as well as a really easy way to reach us. You can open a chat, submit an online case, and you can always call us for support as well. We'll circle back around to that at the end. I want to give just a brief overview of some of the knowledge base articles I will be referencing. Linda will put these in the Q&A stream so that you can easily copy and paste the article numbers. We're going to start off with this very first one. And give me just a moment to pull this up in our knowledge base. So as an extra bonus for the webinar, we took what has been an internal document covering a lot of the frequently asked questions that we get year over year that I put together for our own internal colleagues, and my colleague Melissa Wilson turned this into a lovely knowledge base article. So this is another resource that you have on top of all the others that will help you easily find quick answers to a lot of these questions. Find the question, and the drop down, once you click on, will have the answer directly there. So please take a look. I'll be going over some of these questions, and you'll find even more questions than are covered in the webinar here. So contents today, what we'll be going over. What is year-end all about? That's fiscal versus payroll and the order of closing modules. Running period end processing and what it actually does. Closing the payroll year, what to avoid and why. Which updates do I need and how those various updates affect functionality. And then we'll take a quick look at how the installers work now with the simplified installers that our engineers have put together. So year end, what is it all about? Now, we're going to go through some basics throughout the webinar, maybe a little bit more advanced stuff. Hopefully there's something for everybody. Some of this might be basics for you, but fiscal, of course, is about the business processes and its own defined periods. Payroll year is more about the government reporting. So you may have a fiscal period that matches up with the calendar year. Sage is a good example of a separate fiscal year. Our fiscal year runs from November around to October. But the fiscal year close is mostly about keeping users from posting to periods that should no longer be posted to. It's a time many businesses choose to run physical counts on inventory and other housekeeping tasks, as well as any inventory shrinkage losses. Those need to be accounted for during the correct period and posted as a loss to the general ledger. And then, of course, it's also about determining profit and loss for the year. Because of the modular nature of Sage 100 and the way that different modules will post to each other, as well as the majority of entries rolling up to the general ledger, there has long been a guideline to the order of closing modules. It's one of the articles I referenced, and I'm going to go ahead and pull that up now as well. Now, this knowledge base article will trigger an immediate download. You can see it popping up on the upper right here on my screen. And it'll pull up this old gem of an article, a little document we have here. So you can see that not every module has a period end process that you actually need to run through. All of these are not applicable, but they're still listed because it's also about a logical flow and about the business's own housekeeping and, keeping things in order, as well as the flow of the data. So you can see, you wouldn't want to be closing your accounts payable, for example, before you close your purchase order, right? So same thing here with the sales order. You've got purchase order listed before sales order, before inventory, before payroll, and then finally last will always be the general ledger, as everything, the majority of entries will create GL entries, and those are going to flow to the general ledger. So it's not absolutely critical that you flow in, you follow this order, but it is advised and it is a logical sequence given the way the data posts to each other throughout the modules. Payroll year versus fiscal year is always going to be centered around the calendar year as the standardized period for reporting wages. A super common question we get at the end of the year is, how do we split a paycheck between 2 years? And the answer is there you don't. The date on a paycheck will always be the driving factor. The check date is the determining factor when assigning wages to the year. There's an optional setting for general ledger accrual postings, which allows the user to apportion the general ledger postings only to the 2 adjoining months where wages were earned. And we'll do a little demo and take a look at this. Now, I have seen some users enable this option only at year end, but normally it's either on or off for the entire year. So jumping into the software here, looking at the demo data, PR2, that you can install along with your main install. If we go into payroll, setup, payroll options, there we go. It's this first option here, allow GL accrual postings. If I turn this on and push accept and browse down to my department maintenance, we'll find now we've got options here to enable wage expense, tax accruals, all of them, or just one. If we enable these options and set a payroll accrual account, I'm going to use an example here. Let's say you have wages worked, or earnings worked the last week of November, and then the second half of that biweekly check is going to be the first week of December. So you have wages split evenly between the 2 months. If you enable the general ledger option, the general ledger accrual posting option, the system will look at your period start and end dates and apportion those amounts based on how many of those dates fall between the two periods. What you'll see in that example, if I post my check register, you'll get an additional pop-up that will auto-populate with 50%, splitting half of the general ledger postings to one period and the other half to the other period. So you'll have literally a divided daily transaction register come from that payroll run. Now, again, normally that's on or off for the entire year. I have seen some users turn it on just for the end of the year, and it is not going to affect the way that the check itself will be recorded as far as wages earned for which period. The W-2 wages are recorded entirely for the payroll year, given the date on the payroll check or direct deposit entry itself. And that'll bring us to our next slide here. It's running period end processing, and what does it actually do? So for the most part, the results of running period end processing are to shift the current period settings in the module options screen to the next period, keeping users from posting backdated entries. And that is not insignificant on its own. It's a really important way to reduce human error. The other big impact of running period end processing is the purging of old data as set in each module's options window. So if we look back in the software again, we'll jump back into payroll options. And on our history tab here, it may be in different places in the different options windows in the various modules, but there will always be a section for years to retain history of whatever that module is. For payroll, I've got it set to 5. But it's a really good time to check through your various modules and make sure that they're lined up with the setting for years to retain. One little example or way to think about it is, if you've got your inventory set to retain 5 years and you're trying to delete one of your inventory items that really you need to get rid of, and that item is sitting out on a not fully processed sales order, and you've got your sales order module set to retain 8 years of history. Well, you're going to run into a conflict there because you're not going to be able to delete that item if there's history elsewhere in other modules. So one little example, but it's a good time to go through your modules and line things up to make sure that you're retaining really the amount of data that you actually need to retain, and things are kind of flowing through together. Beyond that, of course, closing the year in general ledger triggers the calculation of profit and loss and the posting of that profit and loss to the retained earnings account. Which brings us to another common question at year end, which is, can we delay the period end processing for general ledger, or can we delay closing the fiscal year? And the answer is, yeah, the system allows you to, but it is super simple to reopen a closed GL period, and it really is safer to handle it that way. There is a knowledge base article on that as well, but the steps, payroll is an example of where you don't want to be reopening a prior year. You can always call and ask if you need to open a support ticket, if you have a question involving reopening a prior payroll year. But for general ledger and almost all the other modules, it's very safe and very simple to do. You just go into the options window, general ledger setup, general ledger options, and you'll have, of course, your years to retain that we were just talking about, but also the current fiscal period. It's as easy as dropping this down, choosing your prior year, the period you want to post to, pushing accept. You go ahead and make your entry, your general ledger journal entry, date it appropriately, update that register, and then come back into general ledger options and set that period back to where you were. There's no need to rerun period end processing for a year that has already been closed properly by a period end processing. Any effect on the retained earnings account will flow through automatically. It's all handled by the system. So, super common question. Yeah, you can always wait to close the year. Lots of people have auditors, need to make corrective postings, but it's really safer to close the year, keep your users from accidentally backdating things, and then reopen it if you need to. Payroll, of course, is always more complicated. There is the closing of the year-end payroll module. That action on its own triggers several important events at year-end close. We're going to look at those as well. It's really important to complete your postings for 2024 and close the year before you start your payroll for the new year. Check dates in Sage 100 will drive the data to be posted to the correct period. But running the actual period end processing will trigger deduction codes resetting, time off amounts rollover or reset, and your direct deposit totals to be reset or cleared out for the new year as well. They may seem like somewhat insignificant little pieces here, but as we go through a couple of examples, you'll see if you fail to have these settings in place correctly and run the period end processing, you can really kind of create a mess for yourself. First example, how deduction codes reset. So the deduction codes will reset according to the setting on the deduction code maintenance screen. This feature was originally available for retirement plan deduction types only, but was added to all deduction types as an option per the customer feedback on the enhancement page. And while I'm on that topic, I want to show you how to get there as well, because this is just a super powerful way to give your feedback fairly directly to engineering. It's up in the help menu, connect with Sage area, submit product idea. Now you do need to have a login here, but once you have created your own login, you can post your own product feedback or enhancement idea, as well as voting for anything else that you see that other customers have posted that you would like to see built into the product. And you can see some of these have quite a few votes. Some of them are already have been taken by engineering and built into future plans for future releases. as well as there's a whole section here for those things that have already been built into releases that have been now released out into the wild. So really helpful way to give feedback and add your voice to features that you want to see in the product. But back to our deduction codes. If you think about how a 401k plan works, you are going to opt into the plan, right? You opted into it once. You're not required generally to opt into the retirement plans at the beginning of every year. You opt in and you continue contributing when each new year begins. You can compare that to something like a garnishment, if you've ever had to set up a garnishment for an employee, or possibly a loan repayment. If you extend a loan to an employee for whatever reason, let's say, $500 is the goal. You would want it to drop off the employee's automatic deductions if they've paid back that full amount by the end of the year. It's really important to understand that this function is triggered only by running the period end processing, and also to understand which deductions you would actually want to reset before you run your period end processing. Once you've run that period end processing, all of those actions have taken place. So if we go back to the loan example, if your employee, let's say, has taken a loan for $500, they've been paying that back diligently, and they've paid back the full amount, right? So that balance on the deduction now is sitting at zero, essentially, right? They have nothing left to pay back. If that deduction code has the option to reset enabled, what'll happen is that balance will reset. And then the next year, it'll start to deduct automatically. It'll kick back in, working towards that goal of $500. That employee is not going to be happy, and you won't be happy because you'll have to go back through any employee that has been affected in that way with an automatic deduction that's kicking back in that shouldn't. That has to be removed from each employee in employee maintenance. Next example here is how the time off accruals will roll over. If you are using the system to track and accrue time off, most employees are limited in the amount of accrued vacation they can actually carry over to the new year, state law or business practice, what have you. So there will always be a corresponding setting on the time off maintenance window for each code. I've got a little example here at the bottom for one of our demo data employees, Jerry Thomas. He's been assigned a time off code that has 40 hours allowed for carryover. So in the screenshot on the left, you can see he's accrued a fair bit. Unfortunately, he hasn't used much at all. So he's sitting at the end of the year at 72 hours available. Once you run that period end processing, the carryover allowance will kick in, and that will be carried over to the new year, and the rest will just drop away. We do also have the option for the anniversary date reset. That is an option in the payroll options you can enable, but most people are still using calendar year. If you don't run period end processing in a timely way, that carryover, that math isn't triggered. And so if they reach their annual limit, like on the left, January, when they should be starting to accrue more, nothing will start to accrue because they've hit their limit and the reset has not been triggered. Once you go in and run period end processing late in February or March, you will have to go back through and manually correct all the accrued and carryover amounts for each employee for each bucket of time off that you're using. It could be quite messy, something to avoid. Finally, we've got the direct deposit amounts. Pretty basic, but this amount is going to print directly on your pay stubs. And obviously, you want it to be a correct year-to-date amount. So that third item is the third thing that's going to be triggered directly by the period end processing. End of the year is also a time for making final corrections. Part of the process of closing any module is checking the data and postings. For this purpose, my colleague Jerry wrote a great knowledge base article which walks the user through reconciling and checking those payroll amounts. And that is the tips for reconciling payroll reports in Sage 100 versions 2018 and newer. 2018 was the version we released the overhauled payroll, and that's why a lot of the articles might reference 2018 or newer, or sometimes we refer to it as Payroll 2.0. I'm going to pull that article up here. I can't say enough nice things about this article. She did a great job, and I don't think it gets enough use nearly at all. It is just a very thorough run through with examples and screenshots. This is not just for the end of the year. This is a great article to use also at the close of your quarter when you're working through your 941 numbers. You can see it's just very thorough, working through the examples, how data flows from one place to another. It's a great resource, and I invite everyone to take a look at that article, Tips for Reconciling Payroll Reports in Sage 100 versions 2018 and newer. Which kind of brings us to another very common year-end question, which is how do I make changes to payroll amounts for the year once all payroll is processed and paid out to employees? We really get some creative thinking and some creative questions at the end of the year. The user has to use their own logic and brain in determining what corrections are acceptable, if any. Reporting should accurately report what was earned, what was taxed, tax amounts, what was paid during the year. Reporting to the government that someone paid more tax than they actually paid is generally frowned upon, and that might get you into some hot water. But there is a way to do it, and it's pretty easy. So we're going to take a look at that. That is the article, How to Edit Employee Wage and Tax History in Tax Summary. Pull that article up here as well. Okay. This is an article I wrote a handful of years ago when the payroll overhaul was fairly new. So again, Payroll 2.0 or versions 2018 and newer. And it's full of screenshots and instructions that walk you through how to do those edits retroactively. I'm going to jump into the software here and show you an example. Okay, pulling up my PR2 demo data again here. We're going to go down into payroll, main employee maintenance, where you'll find your employee records. And we'll take a look at our good old lady demo. Up at the top right, more button drop down. You want to go into tax summary. First window you're going to get is kind of a summary data for this bucket. You can see at the top left, we've got tax group. We're going to have a data bucket for every type of wage or locality rather that has been posted for this employee. You can see there's a lot of detail here, even down to the local for the Pennsylvania. We're going to stick with the federal. Back up to the more button in the top right and detail. This is the window we get next. employee tax history detail. And we want yet another drill down here. We're drilling down into very detailed records here. And this is almost the final drill down. If you are dealing with local taxes, you can drill down even further, but this is where we'll stop. And this is each individual check or direct deposit entry, each payroll entry that's been posted that included federal wages. So if you're looking across the headers here, you might notice straight away that we're missing capped wages. There's a button here to unhide capped wages. It's got to be pushed every time you come in here. Obviously, if you have wages that the tax for which has a cap, the capped wages will be the most important. But you can scroll right all the way through and see all the different categories of taxes and all the data that's being tracked. Also up at the top, we've got wages, employee tax, employer tax, and even time worked. So again, I've got to unhide those capped wages, and the hammer and screwdriver button, the fix button, will unlock them. You'll get the standard warning. You know, be careful is basically what it's saying. Be careful, be logical, make sure the data lines up with what it really should be reported as, because what you're doing here is editing tables that are used for all sorts of reporting. The data that you see in this window, the data table that you're editing with these changes, are the same tables that are going to be pulled into your quarterly tax report in Sage 100. They're going to be pulled into your 941. They're going to be pulled into any of the tax, the tax forms in the e-filing tax reporting window. So it's really important that you're careful and that you have a logical approach here. One example here is fringe benefits. It's fairly common that people might forget about fringe benefits. Ideally, you want to be either recording it on your checks throughout the year so that those fringe benefits are taxed appropriately. But it's fairly common that people might forget to do that or forget to add it to the last check of the year. And you can come in here and add those taxable wages to the correct categories and buckets. Of course, you wouldn't be adding the tax amounts if those tax amounts weren't actually paid and deducted on the checks. But it is a way that you can record taxable wages safely and then have those flow into your W-2 and your 941 or your quarterly tax report in Sage 100, and all that data will match up. Okay, that brings us to next topic, which is going to be the updates. And there are a few in Sage 100, and it's really important to understand what each of them do. When you call in and open a tech support ticket with us, one of the very first things we should be asking you is which version you're running, so we know which version of the code, the software build we're dealing with. That's going to be in your help menu at the top. It's not your help button over here, the help topics. It's help menu and then Sage 100 about. Probably hear a little bit of my Canadian accent coming out there. And I'm running Sage 100 standard version 2024. That's version 7.30. The point 1 is the product update. That first type of update, also kind of called a PU. So what that is a software patch that updates. It's a locally installed software patch that's going to update your program code. And that's going to include things like any fixes to something that might not be working perfectly correctly, any new enhancements that we're adding, new features. And that is going to update all the modules except payroll. Payroll has its own series of patches and updates. And the reason is because when we overhauled the payroll, we knew there would be a lot of things to tweak and adjust, and there would be a lot of updates coming out for that. We didn't want any of our users who might have a custom modification to be stuck waiting to install that update because their custom modification wasn't built for it. So that continues to be the way that works. You've got your product update, that's the 0.1 in this example, and you've got your payroll version. 2.24.2 is what I'm running. We've got 2.25.0 coming out in just about a week or so. That'll be the one you want to install before you do your W-2s. But it's short form for the year. It's 2.24, short for 2024. It's the third update in the series. They start with a 0, and then we've got 2.24.1 and .2 after that. On that note, you can watch for a new function in the 2.25 release that has been something customers have been asking for a while. It was a little bit complicated to build, but you'll be able to finally reverse an entire check run in payroll together instead of doing them one at a time. So another good reason to stay up to date on those payroll releases is you get the new features. Payroll tax update. What is that? So when I talk to customers, I'll often hear, well, I'm running the payroll update when it pops up, and how come I'm not on the latest payroll release, right? So the payroll version, again, these are locally installed. They're downloaded patches that you install on your own network, versus the payroll tax update, which you can find in payroll utilities, payroll tax update. This really is, well, not a misnomer, but a better name or better way to think about it might be a payroll tax settings update. As you probably know, we now have a payroll tax cloud. That's where all of the rates live, all of those things that are updated automatically by us. And I'm going to go ahead and close this out. By way of an example, if we go back into our employee maintenance and look at the taxes tab, the filing status for the federal government, these are the filing statuses that come from the W-4 that every employee should have filled out. And you'll see in the list here, there are a whole series that have 2020 or later, as well as the older ones from the 2019 W-4 and older that are still there, right? So these options, those filing status setting options get downloaded and inserted into your software when you run that payroll tax update. It really is synchronizing any critical settings that you should be able to choose from in setting up your payroll. It's synchronizing data tagging from any changes that we've built in to prepare for year-end processing. If there's a new payroll tax, if you're in Pennsylvania with all its local withholdings and local taxes, you'll know that things change all the time. And generally, in those kind of examples, you want to be on the latest payroll version, as well as the latest payroll tax update. They work together. On that note, it's a really good idea to have a full system backup before you run the payroll tax update. Because of the way the functionality works, that function in particular is often targeted by aggressive firewall and antivirus. Ideally, you have your network tailored so that it's excluding your MAS90 directory and not interfering with any of the program functions. But nonetheless, it's still a good idea to have a full system backup before you run your payroll tax update. Next, we've got our interim release download, also known as IRD. These are special little releases that come obviously in between the other ones. They aren't every year. They're only at the end of the year. And For the last handful of years, they've been generally about changes to the 1099s. We have an IRD this year, the 2024 IRD, and it will be, something you want to have installed if you're going to be processing 1099s. Next updates are going to be the Atrix forms updates themselves. If you have processed any tax forms or any W-2s, 1099s, what have you, through Sage 100 in the last handful of years, you'll know that we have partnered with Atrix, and they handle all of the forms building and processing. They're an excellent partner, and they have a small add-on, right? So the tax reporting add-on that we'll cover how to install in the next webinar next week is really Atrix's software, and it has its own updates that Atrix releases. Those updates will be the ones that you're probably used to. They're the automatic updates that pop up and prompt you to download whenever you run a form in the tax reporting window and there are any form changes available for any location. Generally, you want to run that anytime you're prompted to. You click that automatic update button. However, sometimes your network might block that automatic update from running correctly. It's fairly it's not uncommon, especially with some of our users who are running larger networks, or you have a hospital or a legal firm. Your network is pretty secure and pretty tied down. The Atrix automatic forms updates require things like password protected encrypted files to be downloaded. And so there's a whole series of detail and settings that you'll want to have your IT apply. And this is the article on that, unable to install Atrix federal and state tax reporting updates. And you can see there's a lot of detail here that this is, of course, stuff you'll want to hand off to your IT, and they'll configure your network and firewall appropriately to allow those automatic updates to work smoothly. It's also not uncommon that we may get a call from a user who's waited until the form is due tomorrow and now they can't get the automatic update to work. Well, these steps might take a little bit of time. You want to apply them and have them applied correctly as a proper workaround to get the software all working the best it can. But there is also a workaround there, and that's a way to manually install the Atrix updates. It's the same exact update. So I'm going to take you out there for a moment here, and you can get those updates right on atrix.com. AATRIX.com. Hover over the solutions drop down, find my solution. You can see they partner with quite a few companies, and you'll see Sage Solutions here, and then Sage 100. On the new page that loads, you'll scroll all the way down to the bottom. Button under product updates. And the download should start right away. The download is going to be named Mass 90, the old name of Sage 100. It's kind of just the way it is. And then you would right click on it and run as administrator. And that, like I said, is going to install the exact same forms updates or any software updates for the Atrix tax reporting add-on, just as you would get through the automatic forms update. Okay, so as far as installing the locally installed product update and payroll version, I'm going to take a quick look at how you run those. Those are going to be available in the download portal, which is on the resources area. You should hopefully be very familiar with where to get those downloads. And I'm going to look at the 2.24.2 as an example. Engineering has made improvements to how these installers run over the last handful of years. So to make it easier for the average end user. Once you run it, you always want to run as administrator, click through the EULA, and you can see it's going to have installed and just ask you which bill do you want to install that payroll release for. Any of the current versions will allow that latest payroll bill to be installed. I'm going to cancel out of this one here. And it would basically work the same with the product update. It'll see where it's installed and whether you have it installed at all. The master version, for example, if you're downloading product update 6 for 2022 Sage 100, it'll see where it's installed and you won't have to enter the path like you used to have to do. Brings us around to possibly the most common year-end question. Can you run year-end forms without the updates? And the answer there is, well, it just depends. My favorite example, Pennsylvania, is coming back around. Pennsylvania, Ohio, Kentucky, states where you have a lot of local detail, you're going to have the appropriate data, collating, and tagging. All of the updates that we recommend at the end of the year all have to do with that. Building in those pieces into the software that are required for everything to be tagged and then handed off correctly to the forms processor. So really, the more complicated your payroll is, the more likely you really need to have all the updates we recommend for that to work correctly. Now, like I talked about a minute ago, the Atrix e-filing forms update independently from Sage 100 versions. So even maybe older versions might be able to run the W2, might be able to run the various forms after installing the updates. However, the data may not route correctly over to those forms, and only supported versions that are listed in our documentation for this year, it's 2021 and up. 2021, this is the last year for that version. Only those supported versions will have the updates available to install that will allow all of that data to route correctly to the forms. However, of course, as a workaround, and we'll look at this next week, you can always make corrections directly in the Atrix forms processor, the W2 screen, what have you. You can always make corrections there directly. It's really just best if your data all lines up and flows correctly. And that brings us to the question and answer. Luckily, I think we still have a few minutes. And Linda, what do you think? Do we have any good questions? Linda, I think you might not be on mute there.
Yes, Alec, we had a good question on closing the payroll after you do your first check in January in order to get your time off accruals correct in 2024, because they went through 2024 and they're paid in 2025. So can you explain what happens if you wait to close that 2024 year until you post the 2025 check and how it affects the accruals?
Well, as you saw in my examples a couple slides ago, let's go back there. So your accruals, the accrual happens when you're processing the checks and when you post the check registers. So the most common problem is going to be that your employee is not going to accrue what they're due. If we look at my example on the left here, this would be a good example. Jerry's reached his annual cap of 80 hours allowed accrual, and if you don't trigger that reset by running period end processing, when you run the next payroll cycle for January, the system is going to see that they don't have any room to accrue, and they're not going to accrue any new vacation. When you actually do run the period end processing, that reset will be triggered, and then any accrual that should have taken place in that payroll will just be lost. And you'll have to go back into the employee maintenance and correct those amounts manually. I hope that answers that question.
Let's see if I had another one here.
IRD, I know this was going to be probably should have put a slide in here. I didn't have all the dates in front of me. Generally, the IRD, the payroll 2.25, the Atrix forms releases, those should all be coming in about a week or so. Would you agree with that, Linda?
They're targeted December 20th.
There we go. Now, of course, that's a targeted date. Sometimes, we have, sometimes they're released a day early. Sometimes they're released a couple days late because there's last minute changes. We're all dealing with the same government and the same final releases of forms and all of that stuff. We're all playing a little bit of a waiting game there. So, but yeah, targeted for the 20th.
Let me see if I have another one. I'm not sure what this question meant. We do not accrue for vacation. They give them, after so many years, they get a certain number of hours based on their anniversary date, not calendar. And it said, could we still use this functionality? I'm not sure what that meant. I guess, could they still use the time off feature? Maybe?
Absolutely. Yeah. As I mentioned before, something engineering added when we overhauled payroll was the ability to reset based on anniversary date. So if I look at my payroll options here, my time off tab, reset time off hours based on calendar year or anniversary date. If you are using anniversary date, the way that works is when you run a payroll, the period start and end dates of which cover your employee's anniversary date, that employee and that employee alone, or any other employees whose anniversary date falls in that period, when you update that check or direct deposit register, their amounts will reset directly in their employee maintenance. It's individualized per employee and per the specifics of their anniversary date. You absolutely still want to be running period end processing in a timely way when you are done making corrections and posting your 2024 year before you start your 2025 year. But you can absolutely use anniversary date. It's a great option.
There was a question when that anniversary date is reset.
And I think I just answered that one.
Okay.
It's going to see, and this is another reason why you always want to select those period start and end dates accurately. Your period start date for this payroll should be the day after the last payroll's period end date, even if it's on a weekend where nobody's working. Because if you skip a date and that employee's anniversary date happens to fall this year on a Sunday, you won't trigger the reset. So yeah, that reset will happen when the program sees you processing a payroll, the anniversary date for that employee falling between the period start and end dates that you're processing. That reset will happen when you update the check register. I see another question about the FAQ site that was shown. That is one of the knowledge base articles that we have in our knowledge base. And pull up the year-end center I was talking about before. If you click on the resources on the right side, and that's our knowledge base. So searching the knowledge base, I have my own internal knowledge base up here. And there's your year-end FAQ right there at the top. You'll also find a link to Linda's excellent article on 2024 year-end processing resources for Sage 100. She updates this every year, and it has additional detail. There's going to be some overlap in between these articles. Really, the goal is we want to get as much information out there to help everybody as possible with as many ways to access it as you can. The FAQ was really designed as a quick win kind of thing. Find your question, get an immediate answer. What updates do I need for payroll year end? Here they are. What updates do I need for AP year end? Here they are. So that's out in our knowledge base, along with all the other articles I was referencing.
Alec, can you quickly show somebody how to initiate a chat online from the product?
I don't know if we still have, do we have a built-in link for the chat?
Yeah, I don't believe so.
Because of changes to websites and the way all that works, I don't think we have a chat button yet, but you can.
Oh, okay. Maybe that was taken away.
Well, we have to build it back in. It was there.
Okay.
And we have to build it back in. But there's another really easy way. It's on this resource center that I'm accessing from the year-end center. Again, year-end center, right side.
There you go.
Resources.
Okay.
And you just scroll down here. It's on the lower left. Chat with Sage. Chat's a great option for simple things. And use your judgment, because if you need help with some strange error and you're trying to run an urgent payroll run, you really want to call in for that, right? Chat is for simpler things and what you might term a quick win. Again, we also have the way to submit an online support ticket, and we do try to get those reviewed and assigned out to our teams within 24 hours. So if it's a really urgent issue, please phone in. And again, that number is 800-854-3415. I guess I haven't shown that slide yet. Here it is here. So phone support, 800-854-3415. And that's available at 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern Time, Monday to Friday. Got 2 more minutes. Any other quick questions we can answer?
There was one question about how to get to the blue screen. I'm not sure what that question meant.
How to get to the blue screen.
It was halfway through your demonstration. I don't know what that blue screen is. If you could add to that comment, maybe that would help us.
I think it was around the time you were going over how to edit payroll checks and tax information.
Oh, I think it might have been a reference to the knowledge base here. This is my internal knowledge base, my internal access to the knowledge base. Your external access to the knowledge base would be here. And then you would be able to find all the articles that I'm reviewing.
And
Hopefully
this
that answers that
information,
question.
the webinar will be posted out there where he just was also.
That's right. The recording will be posted out there for review as well.
I think that answers most of the questions. We may have to answer a couple before we post it.
Yeah, we will do our best to follow up on any questions that we haven't answered so far. Go ahead and minimize this. We are at the end of our session. Thank you very much for attending. Once again, I want to invite everybody to the next session. That's going to be part 2 next week, processing year-end forms. And thank you so much, Linda, for the assistance.
Well, thank you for doing the presentation. Hopefully it was well
attendees.
well worth your time.
See you all next week.